basically how this affects upstate New York is that we know from the narrative that Under the Surface, a great book by Tom Wilbur, really tells us the story of this industry. It just came out, and he's really detailed that we really are in the middle of an industry in its infancy, that we are guinea pigs for this industry, and we are refusing, myself and 500 other elected bipartisan officials, to be part of an experiment for the oil and gas industry. There is absolutely no definitive epidemiological studies concerning this industry. We are not going to allow our water, our air, our people to be exposed to this industry without these kinds of things being in place. And right now, the health impact part of this almost seems like an afterthought. We see that they're somehow saying that nobody's going to be exposed to these chemicals or anything to do with the industry. It's going to be so clean in New York. It's just a pipe dream. This industry is a dirty industry. It's never done in this any place in a clean manner. And there is no rush to do this. There's no rush to go forward. The price of gas is so low right now. T-Bone Pickens, the old architect of this whole thing, has said we shouldn't be drilling any more gas right now. So let's slow down. Let's do it right. Let's make sure that we have, the governor has promised us transparency and openness about this process, and there's been absolutely no transparency and openness as far as the health impacts of this. We don't know what they're reviewing. There's been no public hearing on this. And we're telling the governor, if he wants to be head of the most progressive state in the country, which he always talks about, then open and transparency is an important part. And our national energy policy is also very important.
Well, Dan Simmons of the Institute for Energy Research, what about those claims of the mayor, dirty industry, using the people of New York State as guinea pigs? Your response?
My response is that where's the evidence of this? America has the our air quality today is as clean as it ever has been. On hydraulic fracturing, it's been used for over 60 years in more than 1.2 million wells. It's going on just across the border in Pennsylvania. If these health impacts are as bad as the mayor suggests, they should be readily apparent in Pennsylvania. They should be readily apparent in North Dakota. They should be readily apparent in Texas. The reality is that hydraulic fracturing, there's no evidence that it has ever contaminated groundwater. That hydraulic fracturing has enabled the United States to produce a lot more energy at home. As the mayor noted, that means we have very low natural gas prices. That's a great thing because energy makes us all richer. Last night, my wife and I just paid our natural gas bill for the month. It wasn't super cheap, but it wasn't also that expensive, and it allows us to have money to spend on other things that we'd rather spend money on rather than having to suffer in energy poverty. So natural gas has enabled the United States to be the world's largest producer of natural gas. I think that's a good thing, and so far the environmental track record of hydraulic fracturing has been very good.
Kate Hudson, then of Riverkeeper here in New York State, then what's the problem? What is the evidence that there is a problem with fracking?
Well, I think one of the problems is who has the responsibility to come up with evidence. And every day there is more evidence of the negative, adverse environmental impacts of hydrofracking. Every day that going forward in New York is postponed, there is more evidence on the table. The latest.
Can you explain what it is? We should have started there.
Okay. I don't think there's much debate about the fact that high-volume hydraulic fracturing, which has only been going on for 7 or 8 years, is an extremely industrial activity. It is thousands of trucks bringing onto a cleared site thousands of gallons, millions of gallons of water, thousands of gallons of chemicals and sand and explosives, and drilling down a mile or more, and then horizontally, and then fracturing the tight shale in which the gas exists, and then allowing millions of gallons of water that has been contaminated to come back up. And it is not necessarily what happens underground that is the biggest source of problems in terms of impacts, environmental impacts, health impacts. It's what happens at the surface. There are spills, there are releases of noxious fumes, there are truck traffic accidents. There is destruction of local roads. I could go on. And the stories that are from individual families and communities about the impacts that this has had are replete. For the last 5 years, we've heard from Texas, we've heard from Colorado, we've heard the ozone levels in underpopulated areas of Wyoming, and we have heard about the spills and explosions and the contamination of drinking water with methane in Pennsylvania. So to say that there is not evidence of a problem, I agree with Matt Ryan that this is an uncontrolled experiment. The industry is figuring it out as they go along, and that is at the expense of communities and their health.
Well, Philip McAleer, you've been a critic of the critics and raised that alarms and questions about first the documentary Gasland and now the new Matt Damon film, and you're producing your own film in support of fracking.
Yeah, Frack Nation, which comes out on Access TV on January 22nd. Yeah, I mean, I'm from Ireland, but I've been here studying this for 18 months intense study for the documentary. I think really what you've got here is, it seems to be, is progressives who don't believe in progress. Really, a lot of it's anti-change, anti-modernity. They're worried about this new thing that's coming to New York, this new thing that's coming to Pennsylvania. You know, you hear Kate here, the traffic. You know, it's you know, I have found in America that progressives are very conservative. They don't like change. They seem to not like modernity, and I think that's what the back of it. There are lots of stories. She said, yes, we hear stories from individual families, but when those stories are investigated by rigorous science and rigorous investigations, the evidence just fades away. There's no epidemiological study that shows water has been contaminated. The Dimmock case just collapsed. The families invited the EPA in to analyse their water, and the EPA said the water is safe. That's the facts, that's the science. And I suppose it's difficult. People don't like change, but I mean, people have never liked change. Conservative people have never liked change, and I suppose Kate and Mayor Ryan are the true conservatives in this argument.
Mayor Ryan, your response. Mayor Ryan. Mayor Ryan,
do not drink the water.
Mayor Ryan, we haven't heard what you said.
It's absurd that their water. Let's go back to the history of what happened on Carter Road. The industry came in, and after they brought the concerns to the industry, Cabot Oil, and they did testing, and they said, do not drink your water. They bought in the water buffaloes. They said, do not bathe in this water, do not drink it, and this is there's so much behind the scenes. We all know how much oil and gas the big corporations control the thing. They've had a glossy Madison Ave advertising campaign that's cost hundreds of $millions to convince us that this is a clean industry. It's just not.
I think Mayor Ryan,
and we're not dealing with arid areas like Texas and Utah and stuff where there's big gas fields. We're dealing with one of the pristine areas in the country where clean water is going to be dramatically affected. It's not the same animal here, and it's clear that we're guinea pigs for this industry. Range Resources
I think
just didn't know what they were doing in Pennsylvania back in 2003. Then they came up with this horizontal drilling, and we are right in the middle of an experiment. The people on Carter Road are friends of mine. I've seen their water, and I dare you to go and drink that water for any period of time. If it's so safe.
I've been on Carter Road, Mayor Ryan. I've been on Carter Road. Mayor Ryan,
we'll drink that water.
Mayor Ryan,
let's have a party and go see how and drink it.
Yeah, I've been on Carter Road. I've offered to drink the water. You went to Carter Road and you offered the people of Dimmock clean water. They rejected you. The people of Dimmock know that there was always historically problems with their water, that the gas drilling brought nothing new. They demanded the EPA come in, and the EPA said the water is safe. I think you're confusing a lawsuit with scientific evidence. Because someone, in America, I understand, because someone says something in a lawsuit doesn't make it scientific evidence. And here's something that you may not realize. In America, there are a lot of bogus lawsuits. I know that's a shock. Look, you talk about stories from individual families. Sorry, stories from individual families is not scientific evidence. It's not a report. You wouldn't sell your house based on stories from individual families. You'd base it on statistical analysis of house prices in the area. Let's be scientific. Why are progressives? Yeah, but it seems that progressives here in America, there's a war on science, and it's coming from progressive left-wing sources because it doesn't. I don't know where this happened.
I don't know. Attention to some scientific evidence.
Kate Hudson.
Duke University study of methane migration into drinking water. It established through fingerprinting, scientific fingerprinting, that methane, certain types of methane, does come from the drilling. And they were able to identify where it was in Pennsylvania that groundwater was contaminated because of the drilling. And I think this is a complete red herring.
Misrepresentation.
I think this is
complete misrepresentation.
I think the whole issue of focusing on whether or not fracking is contaminating groundwater is a way of diverting attention from where 90% of the environmental and health problems exist, and that is on the surface. And that is because of the poor way in which, both from a perspective of technology and from the perspective of the way in which the gas companies are conducting their drilling, poor construction, spills, leaking pits that have waste fracking fluids in them, the truck accidents, the dumping of waste frac fluids in streams and rivers in Pennsylvania, which was going on before the New York Times series occurred. This is where most of the problems lie. The release of noxious fumes from both the drilling, but also the compression, the transmission lines. We're looking at a 9% greenhouse gas emission rate in the study that we saw come out yesterday. These are where the problems are. We don't have to talk about this red herring, which they like to focus on.
Kate is a conservative. She doesn't like change. She said that. She doesn't like traffic. Listen, I don't like traffic either. Wouldn't like it outside my house if I wasn't used to it. I'm very interested, Kate, that you're saying we need to move away from contaminated water. That's because the evidence doesn't back up your allegations. You claimed for years. You claimed for years that it was contaminated water.
No,
you've said we need to move away from contaminated water.
But the debate over methane and whether the methane is naturally occurring or not naturally occurring is a way to focus away from where a lot of the problems are.
If fracking is so safe, why has there been, for instance, since 2012, has the industry been exempted from 7 major federal regulations in terms of harm to the environment? Why does it need the Clean Water Act? Why does it need those exemptions?
The oil and gas industry is regulated by the states, and whether it's the state of Pennsylvania or the state of New York or North Dakota, Colorado, they are a heavily regulated industry. Just because the federal government isn't doing the regulation does not mean that they're not regulated, and that's a very important point, because the states the states heavily regulate because they are the closest to those environmental issues that, instead of like the regulations being crafted here in Washington, D.C., where we don't necessarily know, the lay of the land in New York as well as the New York regulators. I would prefer for New York to be regulated by New York regulators because they both experience the benefits of drilling, but also the costs and also the downside. And I think their regulations are going to be better tuned, and that's why the regulation is by the states and not necessarily all by the federal government.
But let me follow up on that question, because it's a key one, especially around the issue of the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act. Due to the Halliburton loophole, which was pushed through by Vice President and former Halliburton CEO Dick Cheney, corporations were exempted from revealing the chemicals used in fracking fluid. That's one of the 7 exemptions. Dan Simmons, why shouldn't people then be concerned? If it's safe, why not know what these chemicals are?
again, that is a federal law, and state laws in almost all the states where there is hydraulic fracturing require some type of disclosure of the ingredients. You know, the same type of disclosure frequently is that you get on a bottle of soda, as in what is in that hydraulic fracturing fluid, and that is key. That even though that they might not have to disclose for federal purposes, they still need to disclose for state purposes and to satisfy the state regulators. The state regulators, since the beginning of groundwater regulation, the state regulators have always been in charge of groundwater regulation. It hasn't been the role of the federal government because groundwater is obviously a state issue. So they are the ones in charge, and they are the ones that are crafting those regulations. So that's why around the country there's some variability with the disclosure, but they are state regulations that, by and large, require disclosure of what is in the fracturing fluid.
Matt
Can
Ryan.
I make 2 points with respect to that?
Kate Hudson.
The first is that whatever the disclosure laws may or may not be at the state level, there are still huge chunks of information that is not being made available because industry is invoking business practice protections. And I think I have a graphic here that, if it could be put up right now, that indicates the amount of chemicals that would be used to frack one well next to a home, and this is another thing that I want to refer to at some point, and all of the red containers, those are barrels, are the ones that are not disclosed because of business practice exemptions that are invoked by the industry. The other point that I want to make is that it is indisputable that state regulatory departments do not have the staff, they do not have the capacity to keep track of what is going on. And I think New York is a perfect example. There are less than 20 field mineral resource inspectors in New York State. And the Department of Environmental Conservation itself estimated it would cost them millions of dollars to put the staff on board that they would need to be able to regulate this activity even barely adequately. And that money hasn't become available. Nobody's asked for it. And you know where it's going to come from? It's going to come from the taxpayers of New York.
Well, I'd like to ask Mayor Matt Ryan. Binghamton is in the middle of a depressed area of New York State. How do you answer your constituents who own land there, who say this is an opportunity not only for them to get income, but also for jobs for your area?
Well, certainly, there's no doubt it will produce some jobs and some money for people who have land. But the reality is, as elected officials, we have to make sure that the health and safety is primary for our constituents and for our future. Right now, we've had tremendous. One of the gentlemen, I think Dan, said we have a cleanest environment, much cleaner environment than we did when the environmental movement started back in the late 60s. That's certainly true, but what we've done is injected all this pollution into the earth, and the ProPublica recent article showed that all this stuff is now starting, decades injected into the earth, is starting to bubble up and all over the country. And that's exactly what this industry proposes to do now as they make changes because of all the things we've brought to the attention. They're starting to inject all this stuff in Ohio and even on drill sites, and saying that they're recycling this stuff. But we're going to create a legacy of toxic pollution and Superfund sites that we're all going to have to deal with down the road. We do love modernity to the filmmaker. We love it, and that's why we want to make farmers do what they do best: grow things, grow biodiesel fuels. Let's have Governor Cuomo come up with a plan that makes our farmers more productive and do what they know they love to do, and not pollute their property and not sell out. Many of these farmers are claiming, a lot of people who own land who haven't farmed it a long time. They're just cashing in and they're going to leave. Many people, I've talked to dozens of people down in Pennsylvania, prominent citizens who have left the area because of this drilling activity. This is, we do love modernity, and we need to look at clean energy technology. Global warming's terrifying new math, the Rolling Stone article said last summer, that revealed that the fossil fuel industry has 5 times more carbon in its proven reserves than the science says can be burned if we want to avoid climate catastrophe. If we're going to go into a modern society that has a sustainable way of producing energy, we can't put all our eggs in this basket of fracking. We should be putting a lot more into renewables. The whole world is doing it. Germany's doing it. Japan's doing it. They're scrapping their nukes in Germany. They produced 50% of their energy by solar power a few weekends ago. It can be done, and those are the sustainable jobs and we have. Governor Cuomo, you are putting tens of millions of dollars into research in our universities for clean energy technology at Binghamton University. And we're going to build an incubator. We're going to incubate those jobs into our community. And that's what we should be doing. We believe in the future of our country. That's what modernity is, and that's where we should go. Oil and gas is old technology. We should be going towards new technology.
All right, Phelan McAleer, your response?
Well, you see, we started off talking about science, right? So, you know, Kate talked about science, Mayor Ryan talked about science. Now we've moved on to articles in the New York Times and articles in the Rolling Stone. You know, because the science isn't there. So we're quoting the Rolling Stone now as the oracle. Sorry, I think Americans should base their future on something other than discredited articles in the New York Times, which were attacked 2 weeks in a row by the New York Times ombudsman as inaccurate and unfair. Rolling Stone, we went from scientific. Kate had started off talking about science, then she produced a photoshopped photograph. I mean, a photoshopped photograph is not an epidemiological study. It's not a scientific document. It's something you made up at your computer. We need to look at the science. We need to look at the science. You know.
And what is the science that you cite that says that fracking is safe?
Well, it's a vast petri dish of America. There's been fracking going on in America since, I believe, 1947. I mean, the science is out there. The petri dish is out there. There have been no scientific epidemiological studies to show that fracking has harmed human health in any way.
So what I hear,
the water in Dimock, Pennsylvania, is safe. It was the poster child. I mean, we need to. I'd love to ask Kate and Matt, do they believe the EPA? You called the EPA in and said the local environmental regulatory authority said the water is safe. This wasn't good enough for the residents of Carter Road, who 11 litigants in a community of 1,500 people. 1,500 people signed a petition in Dimock to say our water is fine. It's the same as ever been. 11 people were litigants. If you look at the statistics, those 11 people are the 1%. The people of Dimock who signed a petition to say our water is fine are the 99%. Again, I come to America and I hear people talk about the 1%. In these communities, the true 1% are the litigants involved in lucrative multi-million-dollar lawsuits with no science to back them up. We should not confuse allegations and lawsuits with scientific evidence.
Okay, so can I respond to that? So if there is no science, which is what I'm hearing you say.
There is science. There is science.
And we have had a commitment from Governor Cuomo that he will not move forward until he has the science and the facts. Then why is he moving forward with this decision on hydrofracking without having the health study review completed, without having the environmental review completed? If he doesn't have the science, he is taking a huge gamble.